breaking and entering, drunk and disorderly, law and order. A former prosecutor and a defence barrister, not your usual pairing. And the result? Conversations about crime and punishment that are guaranteed to get you thinking.
Welcome to Justice Matters, a weekly podcast with Lizzie Green and Jay Merchant. Our episodes are every Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram at Justice Matters Pod for clips. Enjoy the episode. This episode deals with the murder of children. Discretion is advised. Good morning, Liz.
Good morning, Jay.
Hey, happy 100th.
100th episode.
I know, it's crazy.
Very exciting. I want to thank all of our listeners and subscribers and people who, respond to us about the pod. We love doing this. And I want to thank Joe.
Yes, definitely his honor.
And our
Connor.
Amazing producer Connor.
Absolutely.
But we're so lucky to be able to do this.
Yeah, we are. And I'm just proud that you asked me to be a part of it once Joe bailed.
Well, I love that you've joined.
Yeah.
So everyone keep sharing and watching. We want to be able to do another 100.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Hey, I just thought I would talk about a film that I saw on Netflix. So throughout the episodes, I've raised Eileen Wuornos once in a while, inappropriate times. But there is a new, I don't know if it's a documentary, but it's a film, and I encourage you to have a look at it because it introduces some concepts and principles that I didn't know existed. So it's and it involves an Australian filmmaker as well, which was great to see. But there's certain elements of this case that I wasn't aware of. So, for instance, in the pretrial stage, there was an application to remove the judge. And the female judge was removed. And they brought on a male judge. And it's quite significant because the male judge in the proceeding allows some very prejudicial evidence in similar fact evidence. So she hadn't been charged or convicted of anything at that stage at all. And they allowed 6 different pieces of evidence to come in that would be worth a legal argument.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting. And it goes through the timeline, her denials, but then her admissions at the end. So it's quite interesting.
Obviously, she's not in it.
Yeah, well, they have footage from previous, I guess, filmmakers, and the Australian went over and did a great job.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Eileen Wuornos.
Your favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's my gal.
Well, we're going to another female person of interest.
Okay.
So I thought for the 100th episode, I'd try and find what I thought was the biggest miscarriage of justice in Australia.
That's bold.
Yes. And so we're going to be looking at the case, and as soon as I give this description, people will know who I'm talking about. But she was once Australia's most hated woman and the worst female serial killer.
Really?
Because she was convicted of the murder of her 4 little babies.
Wow.
And so obviously I'm talking about Kathleen Folbigg, who in 2023 was released from prison. She was given a pardon, and then she did have her convictions quashed in the Court of Appeal.
What is with these pardons? And we're going to, I'll just, go ahead.
So it's definitely been referred to now that she is out, and the courts have found that there was not sufficient evidence to convict her, and that she didn't commit these murders of her children. It's been called the worst miscarriage of justice. And I mean, it has shades of Lindy Chamberlain,
Really?
The concept, this idea of a woman who has done the most heinous crime you can imagine, which is to kill their own child. So you can imagine there's been quite the public reaction both to the charges and the trial initially, but then also to her acquittal, her overturning of the convictions. And so a lot of it I thought was about expert evidence. That's what I thought a lot of this case was going to be about. And I did a lot of reading, and I actually went back to the remarks of the judge who sentenced her originally.
Okay.
And that gives us a lot of context as to the basis upon which she was convicted. And I was very surprised that, in fact, the expert evidence that led to her convictions was sadly lacking, and it was different expert evidence 20 years later that led to her exoneration.
Wow.
So it's an interesting
There's a
one.
big gap there, isn't there?
So I thought I'd start with our little victims.
Yeah, please do, because I have to tell you, I don't know anything about this matter.
At all?
No, so this is
Okay.
and I'm not lying to you.
All right, so because a lot of what I took was from the sentencing remarks, and in all of those remarks, she's referred to as the offender and the convicted, and the babies are the victims. That terminology will come in. I'm not aligning myself with the sentencing remarks of the judge, but I thought if we understand how the whole thing progressed
Sure.
and take us to where we are now. So Kathleen Folbigg and her husband Craig had their first little baby, Caleb, in February 1989. And he was born on the 1st of February and he died on the 20th of February.
Wow.
So his death was deemed to be natural and a diagnosis of sudden infant death syndrome, so SIDS.
SIDS, yep.
And that was after an autopsy and, horrific at 19 days old. So that was the first case. And so that was it then. That had the autopsy, diagnosed it as SIDS.
Everything was definitive and we're trying to move on at that stage.
So then the next year, on the 3rd of June, 1990, they had another little boy, Patrick. And in mid-October, he lost consciousness and was taken to the hospital with respiratory distress. He later regained consciousness but was diagnosed with epilepsy and cortical blindness.
Wow.
And then on the 13th of February the following year, Patrick died. He was 8 months old. Again, there was an autopsy and it determined that Patrick's airways had been obstructed during an epileptic seizure.
Okay, so a medical episode.
That's right. On the 14th of October 1992, their third baby, Sarah, was born. She was happy, healthy, no medical issues. But on the 30th of August, at 10 months old, she died. And again, the autopsy attributed her death to SIDS.
Really?
Yes. And then on the 7th of August 1997, so 5 years later, or 4 years after Sarah died, they had their fourth child, Laura.
Okay.
So like Sarah, she was a healthy baby, no issues. And then on the 1st of March 1999, at almost 19 months old, Laura died. Now, her death was initially determined to be a viral infection which had inflamed the heart muscle, but the autopsy itself said that her cause of death was undetermined. And that finding was made when the autopsy doctor found out about the deaths of the other three babies.
All right. So, I mean, there's a medical element to it, but then the doctor finds out about what's happened previously.
Yes.
Okay.
And so he notified the police because he believed, in his opinion, that smothering could not be ruled out as the cause of death for Laura.
All right.
So on that day, or it said on the day of Laura's death, so even before the autopsy, the New South Wales Police began a murder investigation into the deaths of all four children, believing that Folbigg might have been responsible for them. And their reason for believing that, and it came out again in the sentencing remarks, was that she had been the only one in their presence when they had each died, or had been the one to find the child deceased. Her husband at each occasion was either at work or asleep. And so during the investigation, and this became a big feature, her journals and diaries were seized by the police, and they were prolific. She was an habitual diary person.
So we got contemporaneous notes during all of this.
And they were relied on heavily
Yeah.
to help establish guilt in court because of the phrasing she used. I mean, there was no confessions in the diaries, but the phrasings she used and the way that she spoke about herself as a mother and about her babies, you know. But I also, we'll come back to this, but I also think, how are you processing the fact that each of your babies has died.
Yeah. Well, and I think that would probably come out in the journals, right? You know, what her entries are prior to, during, and after.
And what is it evidence of? Like, these are her thoughts.
Yeah.
And
I mean, a mental component to it, right?
And so they did get experts to assess the meaning of the entries. So on the 19th of April 2001, she was arrested and charged with the murders of her 4 children. And so that was 4 deaths over a period of 10 years. She went through 4 pregnancies, 4 births, and then 4 lots of grieving for her babies. So I will go through it all, but she was convicted. She did spend 20 years in custody for these matters.
Yeah, I mean, on the face of it, we've got 3 that have been ruled medical related deaths, and the one is questionable, and the doctor received information about the 3 previous, and then now we've got a sentence and 20 years in prison.
And she was originally sentenced to 40 years with a non-parole period of 30, and on appeal it was reduced by 5 years.
Okay.
So, I mean, to be fair, she did utilize every legal avenue open to her in relation to these matters. So she had the trial, then she appealed, she had a subsequent appeal. So she appealed her sentence, and then she also appealed her conviction because information came out about some jury deliberations and things like that. And then she had an inquiry that was prompted. So there was a judicial inquiry, then there was another judicial inquiry, then there was the petition for pardon, and then finally the Court of Appeal reviewing the results of that petition. So she definitely, this isn't a miscarriage of justice in that she didn't get an opportunity in court. But what I have taken from this is what I think is a not fair basis for conviction in terms of the evidence that they relied on.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've got some issues with the doctor effectively catapulting this directly to an investigation.
But then on the other hand, you have to think, I mean, it is so unusual for each baby to die.
Yes, I mean, one, and it might sound bad, but one, you can kind of understand with SIDS, and then when we have subsequent, there are questions that need to be answered.
And so you have just hit the nail on the head in terms of what they relied on. So there was a doctor who said, if you get to 4 deaths of babies in one family, it is going to be murder.
Yeah, no, I don't agree with that.
So let's talk about that. But so, I mean, when we think about those appeals and having her hearing and her day in court, I did have a look, and at the second appeal, which was in 2007, so she was convicted in 2003, the judgment said, I have reviewed the whole of the evidence. I am satisfied this was an overwhelming Crown case. I am entirely satisfied that notwithstanding the irregularities, no substantial miscarriage of justice has occurred.
An overwhelming Crown case, yet there's no direct evidence to the effect how those young babies' kids died.
Correct.
So it's a circumstantial case, and it's one on expert evidence that is hypothesizing and drawing the conclusion that if you have 4 kids that die, it's murder.
Exactly. And her diary entries were the other big part of the evidence, Jay.
But unless the diary entries talk about her not liking her own kids, she wishes things were different, I can't take this anymore. How is it that we can draw that conclusion?
Well, it did say some of those things.
Oh, did it?
But there were no confessions that she'd done anything to the children.
Okay.
But
it's still not an overwhelming
Crown case.
I disagree. I object.
Good. All right. So the facts of the case, and I call them the facts of the case, but what the basis upon which she was sentenced. And so I think it's important to run through this because she was given such a massive sentence, 40 years. Like, it's not usual. You know, you'll get life imprisonment But 40 years with a non-parole period of 30, that is unusual.
Yeah, it might be. I'm not familiar with New South Wales statute and such, but there were 4 kids that were deemed
to have
murdered.
been murdered. Yes, yes, that's true. But even the very first appeal was against the sentence, and they said no, it was excessive. But so what was the basis for that? Well, I've given you the broad strokes of each of their deaths.
Yeah.
But little things to note. So Caleb, the first little baby, he did used to breathe quite noisily, and he used to stop breathing while he was feeding. You have never breastfed, but, you know, that is the fear of every mother, you know.
Yeah.
Their poor little head, and they're trying to, you know, they suck for breath sometimes, but this was something that little Caleb did struggle with a little bit. And so he was referred to a pediatrician, and he was diagnosed with something called laryngomalacia, or a floppy larynx. It was a mild condition, and he was meant to, or thought to, grow out of it. And so, you know, there was that little factor about him to start with.
Yeah, and it's medical evidence. It's documented. There was a diagnosis.
Yeah. And so you hit it on the head. There's no direct evidence of how any of this happened. And yet when you read the sentencing remarks, so then the judge says, on the 20th of February 1989, the offender put Caleb to sleep in his bassinet in a room adjoining the bedroom used by her and her husband. During the night, she arose and went to attend to Caleb. As she did so, she smothered him. Well,
no.
Where's the evidence of that? Only the offender was present, and she has not explained why she did the act that killed Caleb, or perhaps because she didn't do it.
She denied it.
Just before 3 a.m., she woke her husband screaming and saying that there was something wrong with the child, and he was at that point lying on his back, and he had died by that point.
Can I ask you something about SIDS?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, is it just something that's unexplained, or I'm just not familiar? I know I've heard of it, right?
Yes.
But I just don't know.
So I did have a little bit about SIDS, but it's a diagnosis that is made when a child of appropriate age, usually between 2 and 6 months, dies suddenly and unexpectedly.
Okay.
And there is no reason to suspect an unnatural cause of death.
All right.
And it is probably one of the most heartbreaking causes of death for an infant, because there is no explanation.
Yep.
Yeah.
It just happens.
Yes. Now, at the time that all of this happened, it was believed there was a link between SIDS and the socioeconomic status of families that experienced SIDS death.
No, sorry.
This is back in the 90s.
I don't agree with that. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an MD. I'm just a JD.
It happens across the board. But so a local SIDS organisation recommended to the Folbiggs that they make some adjustments in their home before they had another baby. And so they did. They did do that.
Okay, so there's reasonable action based off of what they thought might help them.
Yes. And so then they had Patrick. And now he had a sleep study conducted on him when he was about 10 days old. I guess they were paranoid, to be fair. Why wouldn't you be? But the results were all normal. And so Patrick had a bit of a more complicated path before he died. So he had what they call an apparent or acute life-threatening event, an ALTE, at 4.5 months old, where he stopped breathing and had to be taken to the hospital, and that was when the epilepsy kicked in.
Right.
And so because of the ALTE, I think that then was considered part of the reason for why he then later died. But when it came to trial, they charged her with GBH as the cause of that ALTE as well. So she was convicted of that as well.
I just don't know how you draw that conclusion. I mean, you've got medical evidence that substantiates that there is an issue with this young boy. Mm-hmm. And it's not something that just happened suddenly and happened unexplained.
It is, if you think about it too much, like, it is heartbreaking, because not just the unfairness of her being put on trial and spending 20 years in prison, but to do that when she also has to be dealing with the loss of these babies. Her marriage, like, her husband turned against her, and did not support her at any point in this process. He was more than, like, he was quick to he provided the diaries to the police, and he was quick to say, well, she was, she would growl at the children. She was angry. She, just completely turned on her. And even after she was exonerated, he still maintained her guilt.
Yeah, I mean, they were going to get the journals either way. And I'm going to reserve my judgment on that until we hear about what's in the journals.
All right. So then the night that Patrick did die, the sentencing judge said that the offender, so Folbigg, put Patrick to bed. The husband had looked at him before he went to bed, and he was lying on his back, which is the correct placement, so that you can try and avoid SIDS, no tummy sleeping. Yep. And then during the night, while Folbigg was attending to Patrick, she cut off his air supply by the use of a hand or some soft material. As before, she screamed and woke her husband. He decided that the child was breathing, and an ambulance was called. So
again, we're drawing a lot of conclusions.
We are drawing a lot of conclusions. So then, that was the ALTE. Then the night that he died, or the morning he died, the sentencing judge said that while the husband was at work, she smothered Patrick. And immediately afterwards, she called an ambulance and telephoned her husband and her husband's sister and the doctor. And the sister of Craig Folbigg arrived first. She said that Folbigg was there crying. Patrick was on his back in his cot. He was still warm, but he had died. And she said she went to pick him up, but Kathleen Folbigg stopped her from doing so, which was deemed to be some kind of weirdness. I don't know.
All right.
Who's to say how you would respond in that situation? And she would not talk about what had happened other than to say that she had checked on him and found him in that state. What really got me was that the judge, throughout all of this, would say things like, according to witnesses or according to her husband, she didn't seem badly affected. She resumed social activities. She went back to work, as though that's some kind of evidence that she is a murderer. Yeah, it's a bit
problematic, isn't it? I mean, again, how we respond and grieve is different amongst us all.
And did we not learn anything from Lindy Chamberlain? Just because someone looks stoic and maybe stern doesn't give anybody the right to make an inference of guilt in any capacity,
Yeah, fair enough. I'm with you on that.
All right. So then with little Sarah, they used a sleep apnea blanket when she was born so that if she stopped breathing in the night, an alert would go off. Apparently it was a bit of a frustrating contraption because it would go off even if she was still breathing. And so I think, her husband said she was a bit frustrated with that whole thing. But they used it up until she was, they used it for a fair few months. But then 2 or 3 days before she died, they had removed the sleep apnea blanket. She wasn't very well, the little baby Sarah. And the husband said that this one night she was having trouble getting her to go to sleep and that Kathleen growled at the baby, then hugged the baby to her chest, then threw the baby to Craig, and said he had to deal with her. So he said he put her to sleep. And the judge said that during the night, the offender rose, took Sarah out of the room, and then smothered her. The judge said, in the absence of any other account, it is inferred that she acted in a rage.
Ooh, I've got a problem with that.
It's really bad, isn't it?
How can you draw that inference? I mean, look, what stands out to me is, yes, okay, we're getting to a point where optically it might look questionable. However, they made genuine attempts to change and modify the home and practices, all right?
Yep.
And that probably wasn't mentioned in any of the sentencing remarks.
Not as a positive, it was so 2 to 3 days after she removed the apnea blanket, using that against her as well. So then the judge is saying initially she appeared affected by the death of Sarah. She became despondent and aimless. She refused to talk about it. Her relationship with Craig deteriorated. They had separations and reconciliations. But then they went on and had the 4th baby. Now, Laura was tested for many genetic, biochemical, and metabolic disorders. The results were all normal. A number of sleep and apnea tests were conducted. There was at first an indication of mild central apnea, so some disorder there, not dangerous,
But
and it
mild.
did improve,
Yep.
yes. As they had with Sarah, they used the sleep monitor, and again, it was frustrating because it would go off all the time. But after the birth of this baby, the marriage did deteriorate again. They would write to each other and sometimes speak about separating and not being together. Like, it was obviously a fraught household.
Well, it'd be difficult. You've lost 3 kids, and I can imagine the relationship was strained.
And what I take from the diaries, which we'll get to, is that she lived in fear of it happening again. You know, like, what could she have done differently? What could she have done better? Could she have prevented it? Was it going to happen again? Should she be invested in this baby because it'll probably...
Or maybe,
you know?
I mean, probably some questions is why did they have another one or something along those lines?
Yeah, I always
don't
think
know.
about
It's speculation,
that. I know,
right?
and
Like,
you can't.
after the second or third one, if you're in that much fear, why would you continue having kids?
I know.
You know?
I know, because if you love to be a
No,
mum...
and I...
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, so the last baby, Laura, the judge said that she'd had a difficult day with her. So she was a bit older, you know, nearly 19 months old, and they have their little personalities really coming through, and they can try your patience absolutely at that age. And so she was angry with Laura and suffocated her.
Well, but anger and it happens. I can imagine my mom was angry with me when I was a kid.
Oh, and look, bless my youngest, who will not want me to say this, but the tantrums she used to throw, we would have Mexican standoffs when she was 2. Neither of us would give in. Luckily, she's nice and calm now.
Yeah.
Yes. But so there was just this lack, I think, of clear evidence that the cause of death was not some kind of natural cause. Like, they didn't have the very obvious signs of suffocation or smothering. Like, there was no bruising, you know, like, it was inexplicable. And so they turned to this as the explanation. And I guess, anyway, so the judge said that there was no doubt. He actually spent 7.5 pages of a 26-page judgment detailing her diary entries.
Okay.
Which I thought was excessive. And when we look at the expert medical witnesses who gave evidence at trial, not one of them was prepared to say that the signs of death in each of them pointed only to smothering. The medical evidence generally was that the result of each event was consistent with having been caused by acute asphyxiation, but there were other possibilities open.
Yeah, I mean, I come back to this fact that they got to prove beyond reasonable doubt that she murdered those kids. And right now, the judge is saying that it's such a strong Crown case and it's anything but.
Yes.
And they're relying on similar fact evidence that's not evidence. It's possibilities.
And the other thing that really got me was this sentence, or this suggestion in the sentencing remarks. The judge said, "Almost all mothers who kill their children do so because they suffer from some kind of psychotic illness."
Where are we getting that from?
I know. And then he said the evidence is unanimous that the offender is not psychotic. And I'm like, okay, so you've just said you believe you have to be psychotic to kill your child, but this woman is not psychotic.
Yeah, they've contradicted themselves.
Yeah. And I also think that's just such a shocking blanket statement to make. But anyway.
Yeah.
So it was a really circumstantial case. So much about the fact she was the one who found them or was with them. She was the primary caregiver.
That's true. It would have looked better on her case if the husband had found this might be a bit.
He's sleeping through the night because he's getting up and going to work. Like, how does...
No, I know. Optically, though, if there was 1 or 2 that were found by him, that would have changed things.
So the Crown was also allowed to put forward coincidence evidence that meant the similarities in the circumstances of each of the child's deaths and Patrick's ALTE was used to disprove that these 5 events were merely coincidental. And they also relied on evidence from the doctors. And this is where I really am going to get cross.
All right.
So the medical evidence about these 4 deaths of these babies, the doctors said there had never been recorded a family such as this where 4 children died of natural causes, either from the same natural cause or from different natural causes, and there had never been 3 or more deaths in one family recorded from SIDS. And so this was referred to anecdotally as Meadows Law. The Crown were quite careful not to actually place reliance on Meadows Law as such, but the principles that underpin this Meadows Law were definitely relied upon. And so Meadows Law was started by a guy called Roy Meadows. Let me just find him. Sir Roy Meadow was a British paediatrician, and he proposed this maxim that should be applied when considering multiple infant deaths in a single family. His law suggested that 1 cot death is a tragedy, 2 cot deaths is suspicious, and until the contrary is proved, 3 cot deaths is murder.
Yeah, but until the contrary is proved is reversing the onus.
Exactly.
So, no.
Well, they relied on that. It came from some maxim from DeMayo and DeMayo. While a second SIDS death from a mother is improbable, it is possible and she should be given the benefit of the doubt. A third case, in our opinion, is not possible and is a case of homicide.
But if we're defining SIDS as sudden infant and unexplained, how can you put a number on that?
I understand.
Yeah.
But so this was the smoking gun medical evidence that, there was nothing else. So Meadows Law was challenged and later discredited.
Good.
And they knew this at the time of the first inquiry into her convictions. But the use of that reasoning now is no longer allowed. So there was some Canadian report in 2008 which said that it was not credible. And now in Commonwealth countries, the practice of charging mothers based on a suspicion about a pattern of infant death in a family more or less ceased entirely after 2004. Yet her first inquiry, her second appeal, all came after that time, and yet they clung on to this theory. So Roy Meadow himself, I thought this was an interesting side note, was struck off the UK's medical register for giving misleading evidence in the trial of a woman called Sally Clark. She was a solicitor who was found guilty and jailed for the murders of her 2 infant sons in 1999. He was actually later reinstated after a court of appeal decided he was not guilty of serious professional misconduct. But that Sally Clark, her conviction was quashed in 2003, so she didn't serve anywhere near the amount of time that Folbigg did. But she actually never recovered from the trauma of that ordeal, and she died of alcohol poisoning in 2007. And then there was the case of Angela Cannings in 2004, which was the final nail in the coffin for Meadows Law. And in her case, the court said, this reasoning has no place in our courts. And so to me, I'm okay, huge flashing red lights. The whole crux of their case was that you couldn't possibly have 3 or 4 babies die in one family without it being murder. And that's the basis for the medical, I know I'm oversimplifying it, but.
No, you're not. You're simply stating that there's not enough there beyond reasonable doubt. It's perhaps on balance, but not on reasonable doubt.
That's right. And so what I think it came down to was the diaries.
Yeah, I'm keen.
Yes. Let me just find where my notes are on those. So the non-medical evidence at the trial was evidence from her husband, which was later established that he had lied.
Well, the relationship was tarnished, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And
shambles.
he gave inconsistent statements, and he would say those really inflammatory things like she wasn't grieving and she was more invested in going to the gym than looking after the babies, and she was aggressive with them. And then he would say things like, it was very difficult to think clearly at the time, and he needed space to put his thoughts together, just scrambling, I thought. And at the 2022 inquiry, the second inquiry, the guy who ran that said he had no reason to believe Craig's version of events over Folbigg's.
Okay.
So that was interesting. But then we have her diaries. Where is my notes on her diaries? Sorry.
No, that's all right.
So many notes.
I mean, the diaries will give us an insight into what's going on upstairs, right? In the mind of somebody that's lost 4 kids.
Actually, I didn't actually put in too much of what she said because I don't think it's fair.
Okay.
But it was things like pages, like multiple diaries, but like ramblings, And so things like, I hope things are different with Patrick. Can I trust myself to do the right thing? Things along those lines, which I suppose can be interpreted as something sinister, but also they could also be interpreted as a woman who's like, what did I do to contribute to my child's death? How can I avoid it? My heart hurts. Can I put it on the line again? What if this happens again? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so you can interpret it in 2 ways, one a genuine and one a sinister way.
That's right. Yep. And so to place
not a definite
so much weight, like 7.5 pages in that sentencing remarks, in the absence of very clear medical evidence that she did it, like it is not fair to her.
Can I ask you a question? Did she take the stand at her trial?
I don't think so. Okay. She did give a record of interview with police, didn't make any admissions at all, and the jury got to see that. But the other thing that I found really upsetting with this case that came out in the sentencing remarks was she had a really actually horrible youth herself. And her father had murdered her mother when she was younger than 3. And so she was placed into care from the age of 3. Turned out later that her dad had abused her sexually. She had, as a result, issues, I guess with trust and fear, and she was...
Well, working through all of that would have been difficult.
And so little, and to have lost her mum. Anyway, so she stayed with one family. They were her neighbours for a while, but she did get a bit aggressive and difficult, and they moved her on. But so one of the reasons for the appeal, the second appeal, was that jurors had found out that her dad had killed her mum, and the Crown had wanted to lead that evidence. For what reason?
To get out ahead of it somehow, because they would have been using that as mitigation, like defense would have been using that as mitigation at some point, somehow.
And so the judge had ruled that it was not relevant and it wasn't allowed, but then the jury found out about it anyway. And they said at the Court of Appeal it didn't matter. It wasn't going to change anything. But I think there's this tendency then to think, well, if she's had this horrific past, if her father was a murderer, oh, well, she's more likely. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's prejudicial for sure. Yeah.
And I just think she had overcome all of those difficulties and was forging this life and wanting to have the family.
Yeah, and I think, if we go on that logic that her father was a murderer, so she's a murderer, then I don't think we would see the systemic, like the changes within the home atmosphere. Yeah. She wouldn't care.
No, that's
she wouldn't
right.
get the blankets. She wouldn't get the new cot. She wouldn't do any of that.
And I think we wouldn't see in her diaries the emotions that she clearly was feeling throughout all of this.
Yeah.
So, look, I felt like that was a bit unfair to place so much weight on her very sad personal circumstances at the beginning. And then all of those reasons led to the judge giving her 40 years. Okay. So regardless of the appeal, she... where it was reduced somewhat, she spent 20 years in custody, which is a substantial amount of time. So after the first inquiry, they said that they were very happy with the convictions. There was nothing wrong with that. That was 2018, 2019. Then the second inquiry really dug into the changes of the medical evidence, and there'd been a petition with over 100 medical experts who were saying this isn't okay.
Yeah, you can't draw these conclusions.
That's right. So there was this gene, a CALM2 gene, not a scientist, don't understand, but Kathleen and both the little girls, Laura and Sarah, both had that gene, and that could have been the explanation for their deaths.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're talking about possibilities.
But here we've got clear medical evidence. You know, now we've got the science. We're not just saying, ooh, Meadows Law. If you have a third death, it has to be murder, you know?
Yeah.
And then the fact that Patrick had that ALTE gave an explanation, and little Caleb obviously could have just been SIDS, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, there was all of these other options, which meant that the reasonable doubt as to whether or not she had in fact murdered all of them was definitely present. So the inquiry then led to this petition, and the petition was heard by Tom Bathurst. Tom Bathurst KC oversaw the second inquiry in 2023, and he said there were a number of, how can I put it neutrally, provocative comments made by the Crown Prosecutor, who was Mark Tedeschi KC, during the course of his address concerning the unlikelihood of 4 children dying by unknown natural causes. It's not my role in this inquiry at all to conduct a review of how the trial was conducted. It is, however, relevant to the extent to which those comments may, probably consistently with Meadows Law, influence the jury. I will be putting in my report a reference to a couple of those remarks. I'll be making clear it's done for that purpose. He was 100% not convinced of her guilt at all. And the second inquiry said that in terms of the diaries, it is orthodox in the field of psychiatry that thoughts are not facts and emotions are not intentions. And to have drawn those conclusions in relation to her diaries was an error.
Well, and I'll just wanted to point out, like, the prosecutor with the provocative comments, I mean, he's giving his opinion. His opinion does not matter. And it's almost a testament, like evidence from the bar table. So
I wondered to myself, why was everyone so keen to convict her, you know? And there's been research into it. And the thinking is, again, similar to Lindy Chamberlain. When a baby or a child dies, there's outrage and there's fear that this could happen because it's not the normal course of things, you know. And when it appears that the mother may have been culpable, you get everyone piling on because that's the worst thing people can think of, that a mother would kill her children. And so that led to all of this media commentary about the worst female serial killer and the most hated woman, and her news, like her face was all over the news, and everybody just assumed she'd done it because there were 4 deaths. And I just think that reasoning was so problematic. Having said that, the media then also did come to the party when she was exonerated.
Really?
And they are now referring to her as a victim of the worst miscarriage of justice ever, and that she did interviews and she gave her side, and she was able to be portrayed as someone who was, you know, unfairly dealt with by the justice system. So I looked to see what she's up to now because she was released at the end of 2023. So she and her best friend, who had supported her all throughout that whole process, they've written a book together.
Oh, really?
It's called Inside Out, An Incredible Friendship and Fight for Justice. And they say it's a tribute to the many people who helped Folbigg gain her freedom and to hopefully have this never happen to another grieving mother ever again. Also, in part, written to honour Folbigg's young children. She said it's a grief she still cannot shake off decades on. One of the things that also really upset me was she said while she was in prison, she would think about, on her release, being able to go and visit the graves of her babies. But her husband who had the right, because she was convicted. He had them cremated and he scattered their ashes, and she doesn't know where. And he died in 2024, still believing in her guilt, so never told her.
Wow.
And that just really
That's
hurts.
intense.
Yeah. The last thing I found out is that she was offered compensation for her wrongful conviction. And that happens in Australia.
Yep.
So she was offered $2 million ex gratia payment from the New South Wales government, but she's saying that's not a satisfactory amount for the 20 years of
20 years.
Earnings she's lost and for her future and that sort of thing. And there have definitely been bigger compensation payouts for, I think, fewer years in custody. And so she says, how much for a stolen life? And it was stolen from her. So I guess we'll have to see if that gets adjusted. But I think my takeaway from here is expert evidence. And I know that was the 90s or early 2000s, and we've made progress since then. And I've seen there's some inquiries and reviews into expert evidence in court and the standards we should have. But so much weight was placed on those experts. And I think, but what was the basis for their opinion even?
Yeah, I mean, and experts, they serve a purpose. And here it was very gray to the actual expert evidence that they gave. It was more supposition. And
I really think it was an emotional verdict.
Yeah, we've got 4 kids that have died. And this was their way to have some
address
finality.
That. I know. So, I mean, we have miscarriages of justice. We will continue to, I'm sure, because our system isn't perfect. But for Kathleen Folbigg, it was a pretty massive miscarriage.
Yeah, I'm going to be looking when I get back at I'm going to try and find some of these journal entries just to wrap this whole up, to close my own loop. You know what I mean?
I suppose I should have.
No.
But I didn't want to add fuel to the fire of her thoughts in such, fraught times. I just didn't think they were evidence of anything.
Fair enough.
But anyway, so that was it.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I can't believe you hadn't heard that before.
I remember hearing something about, 4 kids die, it's murder automatically. And I was like, no, sorry, it's
Roy
not.
Meadows.
It's not
honestly.
murder. Sorry.
No,
there's more to it.
That is not the case.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, thank you very much for that.
No worries. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed it, please rate and review the podcast. If you're interested in clips, check out @JusticeMattersPod on TikTok and Instagram.